Maid's daughter only had $4 for a blind date. Hell's Angel. At next table observed her until... Sarah Harper pushed her cleaning cart down the carpeted hallway of the Riverside Inn, her steps measured and purposeful. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the geometric patterns of the hotel's well-worn carpet. She paused at room 214, knocking gently on the door and calling out, "Housekeeping." When no one answered, she used her master key to enter. The room was a mess, typical for a Monday morning after weekend guests. Clothes were strewn across chairs, towels lay damp on the bathroom floor, and empty takeout containers cluttered the desk. Sarah didn't mind. There was something satisfying about transforming chaos into order. She worked methodically, her movements practiced from years of experience. As she tucked fresh sheets into precise hospital corners, her mind wandered to her mother at home. The morning aide would be there now, helping with breakfast and medication. The thought brought both comfort and a familiar pang of guilt. Even after all these years, leaving her mother with someone else felt wrong. "These sheets are going to shine like new," Sarah murmured to herself as she smoothed out the wrinkles. It was a habit she'd developed over the years, talking to herself as she worked. The rooms could get lonely sometimes, but she took pride in making them perfect for the next guest. In the bathroom, she scrubbed the tub until it gleamed, replaced the tiny bottles of shampoo, and arranged the fresh towels in neat rolls. Her reflection caught her eye in the mirror, gray strands threading through her brown hair, laugh lines around her eyes deeper than they used to be. She quickly looked away, focusing instead on wiping down the counter. Moving from room to room, Sarah fell into her familiar routine. Dust, sweep, scrub, polish. Each task brought its own small satisfaction. But lately, she'd felt an emptiness creeping in around the edges of her days. Sometimes, watching couples check in for romantic weekends or families gathering for celebrations, she wondered if life had passed her by while she wasn't looking. By late afternoon, Sarah's feet ached as she pushed her cart toward the storage closet. She'd just finished her last room when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Maggie's name lit up the screen, bringing a smile to her tired face. "Sarah!" Maggie's voice burst through the speaker, full of excitement. "You'll never guess what I did." "Knowing you, it could be anything," Sarah said, leaning against the wall. "Did you finally buy that motorcycle you've been threatening to get?" "Better. I found you a date." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Maggie, no." "Yes. His name is Frank, and he's perfect for you. He's charming, single, and my neighbor Linda's brother-in-law. We were talking about you at book club, and it just clicked." "I don't know." Sarah fumbled with her keycard, trying to open the storage closet. "I haven't been on a date in years. I wouldn't know what to say or do." "That's exactly why you need this," Maggie insisted. "You spend all your time either working or taking care of your mom. When was the last time you did something just for you?" Sarah pushed her cart into the closet, thinking about the lonely evenings at home, the routine that never seemed to change. "I have responsibilities. You have a life too, Sarah. One coffee date won't hurt anything. Please? For me?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a tiny flutter of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Just coffee?" "Just coffee. This Saturday at 10, the Little Corner Cafe downtown." After a long pause, Sarah took a deep breath. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll do it. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. Sarah pulled her old Honda into the parking spot outside their modest apartment building. The engine sputtered as she turned it off, reminding her that the car probably needed repairs she couldn't afford. With a weary sigh, she grabbed her purse and work uniform, then headed inside. "Mom, I'm home," she called out as she opened the door. Clara Harper sat in her favorite armchair by the window, crocheting what looked like another blanket. "There you are, sweetheart. How was work?" "Same as always." Sarah hung up her coat and settled into their familiar after-work routine. She pulled out her phone to check her bank account balance while her mother watched her with knowing eyes. "That bad, huh?" Clara asked, noting Sarah's furrowed brow. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart sinking. $4, she whispered. "That's all that's left after paying your medical bills and the rent." She slumped onto the couch, feeling the weight of their financial situation pressing down on her shoulders. "Oh, Sarah," Clara set aside her crochet work. "Maybe you should cancel that date Maggie set up. We could use that money for groceries." Sarah ran her fingers through her graying hair. "It's just, Maggie went to all that trouble to set it up. And honestly, Mom, when was the last time I did anything for myself?" Clara's face softened. "You're right, dear. You spend so much time taking care of me and everyone else. Maybe it's time you had a little fun." "But $4? Sarah laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "What kind of date can I have with $4? "Well," Clara said, her eyes twinkling, "you can at least get yourself a decent cup of coffee, and good conversation doesn't cost a thing." Sarah looked at her mother, remembering how she used to be so full of life and adventure before age and illness had taken their toll. Clara might move slower now, but her spirit remained as bright as ever. "You know what? You're right." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I'm going to go on this date. Even if all I can afford is coffee, I'm going to try to enjoy myself." Later that evening, Sarah stood in front of her closet, pulling out the blue dress she'd bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. It was a bit faded now, but still fit well enough. She held it up against herself, looking in the mirror. "That's always been a lovely color on you," Clara called from her bedroom doorway, leaning on her walker. "Mom, you should be resting." Sarah rushed to help her mother to the bed. "I wanted to see what you were wearing tomorrow." Clara sat down carefully, patting the space beside her. "Come here, sweetheart." Sarah sat down, still clutching the dress. "I feel silly, getting all worked up over a simple coffee date." Clara took her daughter's hand, her skin paper thin, but her grip still strong. "Life is too short to wait for the perfect moment, Sarah. I've watched you put your life on hold for so long. You deserve to have some joy, even if it starts with just a $4 cup of coffee." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. "But what about you? I can't just—" "You can," Clara interrupted firmly. "And you will. Promise me you'll try to enjoy yourself tomorrow. No guilt, no worrying about me or the bills or anything else. Just for a little while." Sarah looked at the dress in her hands, then back at her mother's determined face. "I promise," she whispered, squeezing her mother's hand gently. Sarah's hands trembled as she applied a thin coat of lipstick, the same shade she'd been using for years. The mirror reflected a woman who looked tired but hopeful, her gray-streaked hair neatly pinned back, and her best dress smoothed of wrinkles. It wasn't much, but it was the best she could do. "You look lovely, dear," her mother called from her favorite armchair in the living room. "That blue really brings out your eyes." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mom." She glanced at her watch. 6:45 p.m. Just enough time to make it to the restaurant. The evening air was crisp as Sarah walked the 3 blocks to Lorenzo's. It wasn't the fanciest place in town, but it was nice enough to make her feel self-conscious about her worn dress and scuffed shoes. Through the window, she could see white tablecloths and flickering candles. Her stomach churned. "Reservation for Frank Matthews?" she asked the hostess timidly. "Right this way, ma'am." Frank was already seated, his attention fixed on his smartphone. He looked up briefly as Sarah approached, a quick, dismissive glance that made her heart sink a little. He was handsome enough, she supposed, with silver hair and a pressed button-down shirt. But there was something cold in his eyes. "You must be Sarah," he said, not bothering to stand. "I was starting to wonder if you'd show." Sarah checked her watch again. "I'm actually 5 minutes early." Right. Frank waved his hand, already looking back at his phone. "Should we order?" The menus sat between them like a wall. Sarah's eyes widened at the prices. Even the simplest pasta dish cost more than she could afford. She swallowed hard and focused on the soup section. "So," Sarah ventured, "Maggie mentioned you work in real estate?" "Mm-hmm." Frank's thumbs tapped rapidly on his screen. 20 years now. "That must be interesting. Do you enjoy?" "Hold that thought," Frank interrupted, holding up one finger while he finished typing something. "Just need to respond to this message." Sarah fell silent, fidgeting with her napkin. The waiter approached, and Frank ordered without looking up. "I'll have the ribeye, medium rare." When it was her turn, Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Just the tomato soup, please." The minutes crawled by. Sarah tried again to start a conversation, asking about his family, his hobbies, anything to break through the wall of indifference. Frank's responses were short, distracted, his attention constantly drawn back to his phone. "My daughter's texting me about her new house," he explained, though Sarah hadn't asked. Can't ignore family, right? But he could ignore her, apparently. Sarah watched him scroll through what looked like social media, occasionally smirking at something on his screen. She stirred her soup slowly, each spoonful tasting like disappointment. When the check arrived, Frank grabbed it before Sarah could even offer to contribute her meager $4. He pulled out his credit card without looking at her, signaling to the waiter with a snap of his fingers. "Well, this has been—" Frank paused, still not meeting her eyes. "Nice. Thanks for coming out." Sarah's chest tightened. She'd spent hours getting ready, hoping for a connection, for someone to see her, really see her. Instead, she felt more invisible than ever. The waiter returned with Frank's card, and Sarah watched as he scribbled his signature, already half rising from his chair, clearly eager to end the evening. She sat there, feeling small and foolish in her old dress, wondering why she'd ever thought this could be different. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for her worn leather purse. The coffee had cost $3, and she knew she should leave at least $1 tip. That would be all she had left. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as Frank stood up, barely acknowledging her presence before heading toward the exit. At the next table, Mickey Rough Edges Caldwell sat alone, his massive frame making the restaurant chair look almost comically small. His leather vest was adorned with patches, and his arms were covered in tattoos that told stories of a hard life lived. But his eyes, sharp and observant, had been drawn to the painful scene unfolding beside him. He watched as Sarah's shoulders slumped, noticed how she tried to make herself smaller in her chair. The faded dress she wore had been carefully pressed, and her gray hair was neatly styled. There was dignity in how she held herself, even as that fool of a date walked away without so much as a goodbye. Mickey had seen plenty of tough situations in his life, but something about this woman's quiet desperation touched a nerve. He could read the worry lines on her face as she opened her purse, could see the way her hands shook as she counted out the few dollars she had. The restaurant's warm lighting cast shadows across Sarah's face, highlighting the unshed tears in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, determined not to let them fall. The soft clink of ceramic cups and quiet chatter of other diners continued around her, oblivious to her distress. Mickey shifted in his seat, his weathered boots scraping against the floor. He'd seen enough. Without hesitation, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, much like its owner. His large, calloused hands, marked with the evidence of years of mechanical work, extracted several $100 bills. Sarah was still fumbling with her purse when a shadow fell across her table. She looked up, startled to find the imposing figure of a biker standing over her. His presence would have been intimidating if not for the gentle way he moved, careful not to startle her. Mickey placed the bills on the table with a deliberate motion. They lay there, crisp and green against the white tablecloth, looking almost out of place. Sarah stared at them, then up at Mickey, her mouth slightly open in surprise. His voice, when he spoke, was low and gravelly, but kind. "It's on me. Don't let anyone make you feel small." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Before she could respond, before she could even process what was happening, Mickey turned and walked away. His heavy boots made surprisingly little noise on the restaurant floor as he disappeared through the door, leaving Sarah alone with the money and his unexpected kindness. Sarah sat there, her hand still on her open purse, staring at the space where Mickey had stood. The bills on the table seemed to mock the mere $4 she had been counting moments before. Her mind struggled to make sense of what had just happened, how a complete stranger, and a rough-looking one at that, had shown her more kindness in one gesture than her date had shown all evening. Sarah stepped out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, clutching her worn purse tightly against her chest. The street lamps cast long shadows on the sidewalk as she walked, her mind spinning with thoughts of what had just happened. Frank's dismissive behavior had hurt, yes, but it was the unexpected kindness from the intimidating biker that left her the most unsettled. She could still see him clearly in her mind. The leather vest covered in patches, the graying beard, the weathered face that looked like it had seen more than its fair share of trouble. Yet those eyes, there had been something gentle in them, something that didn't match his rough exterior at all. "Don't let anyone make you feel small," he had said. The words echoed in her head as she walked past the closed storefronts. What kind of man looked like that but spoke with such understanding? Sarah had spent her whole life being careful, avoiding people who seemed dangerous. And here was this biker, someone she would normally cross the street to avoid, showing her more kindness than her actual date had. The click of her sensible shoes against the pavement kept time with her racing thoughts. A gust of wind rustled her dress, making her pull her light jacket closer. She thought about the money he'd left. Far more than the bill could have been. It felt wrong somehow, like charity she hadn't asked for. But there had been nothing condescending in his gesture. If anything, he'd seemed almost protective. Sarah's cheeks burned as she remembered Frank's behavior. The constant checking of his phone, the way his eyes had wandered to other tables, his obvious relief when the evening was drawing to a close. She'd felt invisible then, but the biker had seen her. Really seen her. The familiar sight of her apartment building came into view, its brick facade comforting in its sameness. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, her feet heavy with exhaustion from both the long day and the emotional evening. When she opened the door, Clara was sitting in her favorite armchair, a book open in her lap. Her mother looked up, reading Sarah's face with the expertise of someone who had known her all her life. "Something happened," Clara said. It wasn't a question. Sarah sank onto the couch, her purse sliding to the floor. "The date was awful," she began, then paused. "But that's not even the strange part." Clara closed her book, giving Sarah her full attention. "Tell me everything, dear." As Sarah recounted the evening, Frank's indifference, her embarrassment, and then the surprising intervention from Mickey, Her mother listened without interruption. When she finished, Clara's eyes were twinkling. "You know," Clara said, adjusting her reading glasses, "in all my years, I've learned that kindness often comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the roughest exterior hides the gentlest heart." Sarah looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "But why would he do that? He doesn't even know me." "Maybe," Clara replied softly. "He recognized something in you that reminded him of someone. Or maybe he just couldn't bear to see a good person treated poorly. Not everyone needs a reason to be kind, Sarah." Sarah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror the next morning. Dark circles under her eyes, from a restless night of tossing and turning. Mickey's words kept echoing in her mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." She tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear and straightened her shoulders. "Enough," she whispered to herself. "Just enough." In the kitchen, she found her mother already awake, sipping her morning tea. Clara looked up with knowing eyes. "You didn't sleep well, dear?" Sarah shook her head as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "No, but maybe that's a good thing. I've been thinking, Mom, a lot." "About that kind biker fellow?" Clara's eyes twinkled with interest. "Not just him." Sarah sat down at their small kitchen table. "About everything. About me." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I've spent so many years just existing, going to work, coming home, taking care of everything and everyone else." Clara reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You've always been the responsible one, Sarah. Sometimes too responsible." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Remember when I used to paint? Those little watercolors I'd do on weekends? They were beautiful. You had such talent." "I haven't touched a brush in 15 years, Sarah's voice cracked. "I haven't danced since high school. Haven't done anything just for the joy of it in so long I've forgotten what joy feels like." She stood up suddenly, walking to the community bulletin board they kept in the kitchen. Among the bills and appointment reminders was a bright yellow flyer she'd been avoiding for weeks. "Beginning dance for seniors, all welcome," it proclaimed in cheerful letters. "I'm going," she announced, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "It's only $5 per class, and it's at the community center." Clara beamed. "Good for you, sweetheart." Later that afternoon, Sarah stood outside the community center's dance studio, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the windows, she could see other women her age, some even older, stretching and chatting. She'd changed into loose-fitting pants and a comfortable top. Nothing fancy, but it would do. Her hands trembled as she opened the door. The wooden floor gleamed under fluorescent lights, and mirrors lined one wall. A few women looked her way and smiled, but Sarah felt like an imposter. She found a spot near the back, trying to make herself invisible. The instructor, an energetic woman in her 50s named Joy, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "Welcome, everyone. Remember, we're here to move, to feel good, and most importantly, to have fun." As the music started, something with a gentle Latin rhythm, Sarah felt stiff and awkward. Her body seemed to have forgotten how to move naturally. She watched the other women, some graceful, others just as uncertain as she was, but all of them trying. Halfway through the class, something shifted. Maybe it was the way the music flowed, or maybe it was Joy's encouraging words, but Sarah felt her shoulders begin to relax. Her movements became less mechanical. When Joy demonstrated a simple turn, Sarah attempted it, and though she stumbled slightly, she found herself giggling instead of feeling embarrassed. By the end of the hour, a thin sheen of sweat covered her skin, and her cheeks were flushed. But there was something else, too. A warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion. For just a moment, she'd forgotten about bills, about work, about all her worries. For just a moment, She'd simply danced. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Sarah made her way down Main Street. Her arms ached from her morning shift at the hotel, where she'd stripped and remade countless beds. The work wasn't getting any easier as the years went by, but she kept at it, knowing her mother depended on her. Lost in thought about the grocery list in her pocket, Sarah almost missed the familiar figure sitting at Pete's cafe. Her steps faltered as she recognized Mickey, the mysterious biker who'd shown her such unexpected kindness at the restaurant. He sat at an outdoor table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, his leather jacket draped over the back of his chair. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when Mickey looked up and noticed her. His weathered face broke into a gentle smile, and he raised his hand in a friendly wave. Sarah felt her cheeks warm as she awkwardly lifted her own hand to wave back. She hadn't stopped thinking about his kindness that night, but now, faced with him in broad daylight, she didn't know what to do or say. She quickened her pace, planning to hurry past the cafe, but then noticed Mickey standing up. Her first instinct was to keep walking, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the way he moved, careful, deliberate, like he didn't want to startle her. "Ms. Harper?" he called out, his voice gravelly but warm. "Heading to the store?" Sarah nodded, surprised he remembered her name. "Yes, I need to pick up some things for my mother." Mickey glanced at his watch, then back at her. "Mind if I walk with you? Pete's coffee isn't what it used to be anyway." He gestured at his half-full cup with a slight grimace. Sarah hesitated, clutching her purse closer. Mickey must have noticed her uncertainty because he took a step back, giving her space. "Just thought you might want some company," he said softly. "And maybe an extra pair of arms for those groceries." The gentle consideration in his voice caught her off guard. This man, with his tattoos and rough exterior, showed more thoughtfulness than many people she'd known her whole life. Still, Sarah felt nervous about accepting his help. "I wouldn't want to trouble you," she said, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Mickey shook his head. "No trouble at all. Been sitting too long anyway." He pulled on his leather jacket, leaving a tip on the table. As they walked toward the grocery store, Sarah snuck glances at her unexpected companion. Up close, she could see the silver threading through his beard, the laugh lines around his eyes that softened his otherwise intimidating appearance. "Thank you again," she said suddenly, "for what you did that night at the restaurant." Mickey's expression grew serious. "That fellow had no right treating you that way. Sometimes people forget their manners." He paused, then added, "Besides, everyone deserves a bit of kindness now and then." At the store entrance, Sarah grabbed a shopping cart, and Mickey fell into step beside her. She found herself relaxing as they moved through the aisles, his presence oddly comforting. When she reached for a heavy bag of potatoes, Mickey stepped forward. "Let me get that for you," he offered, easily lifting the bag into the cart. "These things can be tricky on the back." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. "That's very kind of you." As they continued shopping, Sarah began to see beyond Mickey's rough exterior. There was a gentleness in how he helped her select the ripest tomatoes, a warmth in how he listened when she talked about her mother's favorite bread. With each small interaction, her initial nervousness began to fade, replaced by a growing curiosity about this man who seemed determined to show her kindness. Sarah noticed Mickey's motorcycle more and more often these days. Sometimes it was parked outside the grocery store when she went shopping. Other times, she'd spot it near the community center after her dance class. At first, she thought it was just coincidence, but deep down, she knew better. One morning, as she hurried to her car for work, it wouldn't start. Sarah turned the key again and again, but the engine only made a sad clicking sound. She was about to call a taxi when she heard the familiar rumble of a motorcycle. "Car trouble?" Mickey's gruff voice called out. He wore his usual leather jacket, but today she noticed it was well worn around the edges, like it had seen many miles of road. "Yes," Sarah sighed, clutching her purse. "I'm going to be late for work." Mickey walked over, his heavy boots scuffing against the pavement. "Pop the hood," he said, rolling up his sleeves. Sarah couldn't help but notice the faded tattoos on his forearms as he leaned over the engine. "Looks like your battery terminals are corroded," he explained, pointing to some greenish buildup. "Got any baking soda at home?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "Yes, actually." "Go grab it. We'll clean these up real quick." While Sarah fetched the baking soda, she thought about how different Mickey was from what she'd initially imagined. He wasn't just the intimidating biker who'd left money on her table that night. He was becoming familiar. Together they mixed the baking soda with water, and Mickey showed her how to clean the battery terminals. His hands were rough but gentle as he worked, explaining each step clearly. When the car started right up, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do this." Mickey shrugged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ain't nothing. Better than letting you waste money on a mechanic for something simple." Over the next few weeks, Mickey seemed to appear whenever Sarah needed help. When her grocery bags were too heavy, he'd materialize to carry them. When she mentioned her mother's wheelchair needed fixing, he showed up with tools the next day. Each time, he acted like it was no big deal, but Sarah saw the care in his actions. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench outside her apartment building, Sarah found herself telling Mickey about her mother's declining health. He listened quietly, offering no platitudes or empty comfort, just his presence and understanding. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I feel like I'm drowning in responsibilities." Mickey nodded, his eyes focused on the distance. "Life can be heavy sometimes," he said. "But you don't always have to carry it alone." His words stayed with Sarah long after he left that day. She began to notice how he'd check in on her regularly, how he remembered little details about her life, how he never asked for anything in return for his help. At the community center's weekly dance class, Sarah caught herself smiling when she spotted his motorcycle in the parking lot. She knew he'd be there when she finished, ready to walk her home, telling stories about his travels that made her laugh despite herself. The man who had once seemed so intimidating had become a steady presence in her life. His leather jacket and tattoos no longer made her nervous. Instead, she found comfort in his reliability, his quiet strength, and his genuine kindness. As Sarah watched him fix her kitchen sink one evening, she realized something had changed. Mickey wasn't just the mysterious biker anymore. He was someone she could trust, someone who made her feel safe. Though questions about his intentions still lingered in the back of her mind, she couldn't deny that his presence had become a bright spot in her otherwise routine life. Sarah sat across from Mickey in a worn vinyl booth at Joe's Diner, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting a warm glow across their table. She watched as Mickey stirred his black coffee, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate spoon. "Thank you for meeting me here," Sarah said softly, her voice barely audible above the clinking of dishes and murmured conversations around them. "I've been wanting to properly thank you for everything you've done." Mickey shook his head, his silver hair catching the light. "No need for thanks, just felt like the right thing to do." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've never really talked to anyone about this, but—" She paused, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. Between work and taking care of Mom, there's nothing left of me anymore." Mickey's eyes softened as he listened, his usual stern expression melting away. Sarah continued, her words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. Mom needs me. She's all I have, and I love her dearly. But sometimes, she blinked back tears. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever get to live my own life. Is that terrible of me? No, Mickey said firmly. It ain't terrible to want something for yourself. I had dreams once, Sarah admitted, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. I wanted to paint, to travel. But life had other plans, and now… She gestured vaguely. Now I'm just the maid who can barely afford coffee. Mickey leaned forward, his presence somehow both intimidating and comforting. Listen, Sarah, you're more than what your wallet says, more than your job, more than your duties. There was something in his voice that made Sarah look up. Mickey's face had changed, showing a vulnerability she hadn't expected to see. I know something about feeling trapped, he said, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a faded tattoo. Made plenty of wrong turns in my life, joined the wrong crowd, hurt people who didn't deserve it. He traced the tattoo with his finger. Spent years thinking that's all I could be, just another tough guy making bad choices. Sarah watched as Mickey struggled with his words, his usual gruffness giving way to something raw and honest. Never really connected with anyone, he continued. Kept everyone at arm's length. Safer that way, you know? He met her eyes. But seeing you that night at the restaurant, something just clicked. Reminded me of myself in a way, someone who'd forgotten they deserved better. Sarah felt tears welling up again, but for a different reason now. Why me? She whispered. Mickey's face softened further. Because you've got this light about you, Sarah. Even when you're down, it's still there. Makes a man want to be better just being around it. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with such emotional honesty. Never told anyone this stuff before. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared confessions hanging between them. Sarah reached across the table and briefly squeezed Mickey's hand, a gesture of understanding that needed no words. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, warming them both as they sat there, two lonely souls finding an unexpected connection over coffee and honest words. Sarah stood in front of the community center's bulletin board, her fingers tracing over the colorful flyer advertising weekend art classes. The paper was slightly worn at the edges, as if it had been waiting there just for her. Her heart fluttered as she remembered the joy painting once brought her, back before life's responsibilities had taken over. It's only 2 hours every Saturday, she whispered to herself, pulling out her phone to check her schedule. Her mother usually napped during those hours anyway. The timing seemed perfect, almost too perfect. That evening, Sarah dug through her closet, pushing aside old sweaters and boxes until she found what she was looking for, her old art supplies. The wooden box was dusty, but inside, her brushes were still wrapped carefully in cloth, preserved from years ago. She ran her fingers over the bristles, remembering how they used to dance across canvas, creating worlds of color and emotion. The following Saturday, Sarah arrived early to class, her hands clutching her rescued art supplies. The classroom smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Other students filtered in, some younger, some older, all sharing nervous smiles and tentative hellos. Welcome, everyone. The instructor, a woman named Beth, greeted them warmly. Today we're going to start with something simple, just getting comfortable with the brushes again. Sarah's first strokes were hesitant, like a rusty gate creaking open. But as the minutes passed, something awakened inside her. The familiar feel of the brush, the way the colors blended on her palette. It all came flooding back. She painted a simple scene, a sunrise over mountains, the kind she used to dream about seeing in person. That's beautiful, Beth commented, pausing behind Sarah's easel. You've done this before, haven't you? Sarah nodded, blushing slightly. A long time ago, before… She trailed off, thinking of her mother, of all the years spent caring for others instead of nurturing her own passions. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to Saturday mornings more than anything else. She would wake up early, prepare her mother's breakfast, make sure she was comfortable, and then hurry to class, her heart lighter with each step. Her paintings improved with each session. She captured landscapes, still lifes, and finally, faces, including one of her mother, sleeping peacefully in her favorite chair. The act of creating something beautiful again filled a void she hadn't even realized was there. But with each moment of joy came a twinge of guilt. One Saturday, as she was cleaning her brushes after class, she overheard two other students making plans for a painting trip to the coast. Her heart yearned to join them, to experience something new, to see the ocean she so often painted. But the thought of leaving her mother, even for a day, made her stomach knot with anxiety. That evening, as she showed her mother her latest painting, Clara smiled weakly and said, "You're getting so good again, dear, just like you used to be." Sarah's brush paused mid-stroke on her current work. The words "used to be" echoed in her mind. She stared at the half-finished canvas before her, seeing both what was and what could be. Her newfound confidence in art made her feel alive, but the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on her shoulders. She glanced at her mother, peacefully dozing in her chair, then back at her painting. The colors seemed less vibrant suddenly, muted by the familiar conflict between duty and desire. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her brush, caught between two worlds, the one she dreamed of and the one she lived in. Sarah stared at the empty pill organizer on her mother's nightstand, her hands trembling as she sorted through the various medications. The past week had been a blur of doctor's visits, sleepless nights, and mounting worry. Her mother's sudden decline had caught her off guard, leaving her scrambling to adjust to this new reality. "Sarah?" Her mother's weak voice called from the bedroom. "Is that you, dear?" "Yes, Mom, I'm coming." Sarah hurried to her mother's side, forcing a smile onto her tired face. Clara lay in bed, looking smaller and more fragile than ever, her silver hair spread across the pillow like a halo. "You should be at work," Clara whispered, her eyes filled with concern. Sarah shook her head, adjusting her mother's blanket. "I called in. They understand." The words felt hollow in her throat. Her supervisor had been understanding, but she could hear the strain in his voice. How long would that understanding last? The art supplies she'd bought for her weekend class sat untouched in the corner, collecting dust. The brochure for the community center's dance program lay buried under a stack of medical bills. All those small steps toward happiness she'd taken seemed to mock her now. Clara reached for Sarah's hand. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know you were starting to—" "Don't," Sarah cut her off gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for. This is what families do." She squeezed her mother's hand, ignoring the ache in her chest. The afternoon dragged on as Sarah moved through her caretaking routine. Change the sheets, prepare lunch, measure medications, check vital signs. The rhythm was familiar, but it felt heavier now, weighted with the dreams she'd dared to nurture. A knock at the door startled her as she was heating up some soup. Through the peephole, she saw Mickey's broad frame filling the doorway. For a moment, she considered pretending she wasn't home, but something in his stance, concerned yet patient, made her open the door. "Hey," he said softly, his usually gruff voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Hadn't seen you around. Wanted to check if everything's okay." Sarah leaned against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted. "Mom's not doing well. I've had to take some time off work." Mickey nodded, his eyes studying her face. You look tired. I'm fine, she said automatically, but the words felt like sand in her mouth. When's the last time you ate something? Or got more than a couple hours of sleep? Sarah shrugged, avoiding his gaze. I don't have time to worry about that. Mom needs me. Sarah, Mickey's voice was firm but kind. You can't pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of yourself, too. What I need, Sarah said, her voice tight with emotion, is to focus on my mother. Everything else. It was silly anyway, thinking I could just start living some different life at my age. That's not true, and you know it, Mickey insisted. The Sarah I've gotten to know these past weeks, she was coming alive again. Don't let that go. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. I don't have a choice, she whispered. I can't do both. I can't be there for her and still... A timer dinged in the kitchen. Her mother's soup. Sarah straightened up, wiping quickly at her eyes. I have to go. Mom needs her lunch. Mickey reached out as if to touch her arm, but stopped himself. At least let me bring you some dinner later. You shouldn't have to do everything alone. But Sarah was already shaking her head, retreating back into the apartment. Thanks, but we'll be fine. We always are. She closed the door before he could say anything else, leaving him standing in the hallway with concern etched across his weathered face. Sarah sat at her mother's bedside, watching the gentle rise and fall of Clara's chest as she slept. The afternoon sun filtered through thin curtains, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Her mother's medical bills lay scattered on the small table nearby, each one a reminder of the mounting pressure she faced. She glanced at her phone, seeing another missed call from Mickey. He'd been reaching out more frequently since her mother's condition worsened, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to answer. The guilt gnawed at her insides every time she thought about the art classes she'd signed up for, or the dance lessons she'd started taking. What kind of daughter thinks about painting when her mother can barely get out of bed? She whispered to herself, running her fingers through her graying hair. The sound of a motorcycle rumbling outside made her heart skip. She knew that sound by now. Mickey's Harley. Sarah stood up slowly, her joints protesting after sitting for so long. She moved to the window, peeking through the curtains to see him parking his bike. Oh, Mickey, she sighed, watching him remove his helmet. I can't do this right now. But there he was, walking up to her door with determined steps. His leather jacket couldn't hide the concern in his posture. Sarah opened the door before he could knock, pressing a finger to her lips to indicate her mother was sleeping. You've been avoiding me, Mickey said softly, his gruff voice barely above a whisper. His eyes, usually so fierce, held nothing but warmth as they studied her face. Sarah stepped onto the small porch, pulling the door nearly closed behind her. I haven't been avoiding you, she lied. I've just been busy with Mom. Mickey leaned against the porch railing, his large frame somehow making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. Sarah, I've watched you these past few weeks. You're withdrawing from everything. Your classes, your friends, even yourself. What else am I supposed to do? Her voice cracked slightly. Mom needs me. She's all alone, and I'm all she has. But what about what you need? Mickey asked, his words gentle but direct. What about all those dreams you told me about? The painting? The dancing? Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. Those were silly ideas. I was being selfish, thinking I could just go off and enjoy myself while Mom suffers. Is that what you really believe? Mickey stepped closer, his presence steady and reassuring. Or is that what you're telling yourself because you're scared? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She turned away, wiping at her eyes with trembling hands. I don't know how to do both, she admitted finally. I don't know how to care for her and still have something left for myself. And honestly, I don't know if I deserve to. Mickey's weathered hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and comforting. Sarah, look at me. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. Are you living? He asked softly. Or are you just existing for others? The dam broke. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she shook her head. I don't know anymore, she whispered. I honestly don't know how to balance any of it. Every time I try to do something for myself, I feel like I'm failing her. And every time I focus entirely on Mom, I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself. Sarah stood in her small kitchen, mechanically stirring a pot of soup for her mother. The steam rose in lazy swirls, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, like the knots she sometimes found in her mother's yarn. Mickey had called earlier, asking if she needed anything from the store. His kindness, which usually warmed her heart, now felt like another weight pressing down on her chest. She'd snapped at him, telling him she didn't need his help or his pity. The soup began to boil over, startling her out of her thoughts. Sarah quickly turned down the heat, but some of the liquid had already spilled onto the stovetop. Just perfect, she muttered, grabbing a dishcloth to clean up the mess. Her hands trembled as she wiped the surface. The trembling spread until she could barely hold the cloth. Suddenly, everything felt too heavy. The responsibility of caring for her mother, the endless cleaning at work, and now these confusing feelings for Mickey. The dishcloth fell from her fingers as she gripped the counter's edge. I can't do this anymore, she whispered to the empty kitchen. I just can't. Tears began rolling down her cheeks, dropping onto the counter she'd just cleaned that morning. Years of putting everyone else first, of being the responsible one, of never complaining. It all came crashing down around her. She heard her mother cough in the other room and quickly wiped her eyes. But instead of going to check on her, Sarah sank down onto the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small, like she used to do as a child when things became too much. The phone rang. Mickey's name flashed on the screen. Sarah watched it ring until it stopped, guilt mixing with relief. He'd been nothing but kind to her, showing up when she needed help, offering support without pushing too hard. And how had she repaid him? By pushing him away, afraid that if he saw how broken she really was, he'd leave anyway. I'm sorry, she whispered to the silent phone. I'm just not strong enough for any of this. She stayed there on the floor until her mother called out for her soup. Sarah pulled herself up, wiped her face one last time, and carried the bowl to her mother's room with steady hands and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The next morning, Sarah was sorting through bills at her small kitchen table when she heard a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that knock. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find Mickey standing there with 2 bags of groceries. I know you said not to come, he said, his gruff voice gentle. But I figured you might need these anyway. He held up the bags, and Sarah could see fresh vegetables and her mother's favorite brand of tea peeking out. Sarah felt tears threatening again. Mickey, she started, but he shook his head. You don't have to explain anything, he said. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah, no matter how hard you try to push me away. He set the bags down just inside the door. I've had plenty of practice being stubborn. His words hit her like a warm wave, breaking through the walls she'd built. She wanted to tell him how much it meant to her, how scared she was of letting anyone close, how tired she was of being strong all the time. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Mickey gave her a small smile, understanding in his eyes. I'll see you around, he said softly, turning to leave. Sarah watched him go, her heart both lighter and heavier at the same time. Sarah sank into her worn kitchen chair, the weight of the day settling into her bones. The quiet of the apartment felt both comforting and lonely as she picked at the simple meal she'd prepared, a small bowl of soup and half a sandwich. Her mother was already asleep in the next room, the soft sound of her breathing mixing with the gentle hum of the window air conditioner. The evening light filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the kitchen table. Sarah's gaze drifted to the small canvas propped against the wall, her latest painting from the art class she'd started taking. It wasn't perfect, just a simple landscape of the park where she sometimes sat during her lunch breaks, but it made her smile. She hadn't touched a paintbrush in over 20 years before Mickey had encouraged her to try again. Mickey. The thought of him brought a warmth to her chest that surprised her. These past few months had been different, brighter somehow. Even with all the challenges of caring for her mother, she'd managed to carve out small moments for herself. The dance class at the community center, though she'd only made it to 3 sessions, had awakened something in her she thought was long gone. A sense of joy, of movement, of being alive. She took another spoonful of soup, remembering how she used to rush through meals, always hurrying to the next task, the next responsibility. Now she was learning to savor these quiet moments, to appreciate the simple pleasure of a warm meal and a moment of peace. Her old recipe box sat on the counter, another small victory. Last weekend she'd finally organized it, pulling out the yellowed cards her grandmother had written. She'd even tried making her mother's favorite coconut cake, something she hadn't done in years. It hadn't turned out quite right, but the attempt itself felt like progress. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Sarah reached for it, checking the caller ID. Mickey's name appeared on the small screen, and her heart did a little flip. "Hello," she answered, trying to keep her voice low so as not to wake her mother. "Hey," Mickey's gravelly voice came through the line, warm and familiar. "Just wanted to check in. Make sure you're doing okay." Sarah smiled, twirling the phone cord around her finger like a teenager. "I'm okay. Just finished dinner." "You eating enough?" The concern in his voice was genuine, making her chest tighten with emotion. "Yes, I am. I even made soup from scratch today." "Good," he said simply, but she could hear the approval in his tone. "Your mom doing all right?" "She had a good day," Sarah replied, glancing toward her mother's room. "We sat in the garden for a while this afternoon." There was a comfortable pause, the kind that only exists between people who don't need to fill every silence. "Well," Mickey said finally, "just wanted to hear your voice. Get some rest, Sarah." "Thank you for calling, Mickey," she said softly, meaning it more than she could express. "Good night." After hanging up, Sarah sat there for a moment longer, feeling the lingering warmth of the conversation. It was amazing how such a brief call could lift her spirits, remind her that she wasn't alone in this world. Even on the hardest days, when everything felt overwhelming, knowing that someone cared enough to check on her made all the difference. She looked at her half-finished painting again, then at the recipe box, and finally at the dance class flyer still pinned to her refrigerator. Small steps, but steps forward nonetheless. Despite everything, she was growing, changing, coming back to life in ways she hadn't thought possible just a few months ago. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching the early morning light filter through the curtains. The gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers from the small garden she'd started tending. It wasn't much, just a few potted plants on her tiny balcony. But it gave her something to look forward to each day. Her mother was sleeping peacefully in the next room, her breathing steady and rhythmic. The new medication seemed to be helping, and the nurse who visited twice a week had shown Sarah better ways to manage her mother's care. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. One day at a time, Sarah whispered to herself, a phrase Mickey had taught her. She smiled, thinking about how he'd become such a constant in her life. His motorcycle would rumble down her street every few days, and he'd always find some excuse to stop by, bringing fresh bread from the bakery or offering to fix a loose cabinet door. That afternoon, Sarah met her old friend Beth for coffee at the local diner. They hadn't seen each other in months, and Sarah felt a warmth in her chest as they caught up. "You seem different," Beth said, stirring her coffee. "There's something lighter about you." Sarah nodded, wrapping her hands around her warm mug. "I'm trying to find balance. It's not easy, but I'm learning that taking care of myself isn't selfish." After coffee, Sarah walked to the small movie theater down the street. It was Tuesday, senior discount day, and she'd been wanting to see the new romance film everyone was talking about. The theater was nearly empty, and she found herself relaxing into the worn velvet seat, losing herself in the story. When she got home, Mickey was waiting outside her building, leaning against his bike. His leather jacket was worn at the edges, but clean and well kept. He stood up straight when he saw her, a gentle smile breaking through his rough exterior. "Hey there," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "How was the movie?" Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you know I went to the movies?" "Beth mentioned it when I ran into her at the diner." He shuffled his feet, looking almost shy. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Despite their growing friendship, she still felt nervous sometimes around Mickey, especially when he got serious. "There's this charity event this weekend," he continued. "The local motorcycle club is raising money for the children's hospital. We do it every year." He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "I'm volunteering, and I thought, well, maybe you'd like to come?" Sarah's first instinct was to say no. A motorcycle club event? It seemed so far outside her comfort zone. But then she remembered how far she'd come since that disastrous blind date months ago, how Mickey had shown her that appearances could be deceiving. "Will there be other bikers there?" she asked hesitantly. Mickey chuckled. "Yeah, but they're not as scary as they look. Most of them are just big teddy bears who love helping kids." His eyes turned serious. "You don't have to come if you're not comfortable. I just thought—" "I'll come," Sarah said, surprising herself with how quickly the words came out. "It sounds interesting." The smile that spread across Mickey's face made her glad she'd agreed. "Really? That's great. I mean—" He cleared his throat, trying to contain his excitement. "It'll be fun, promise." Sarah nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. It wasn't just about stepping out of her comfort zone anymore. It was about embracing new experiences, new friendships, new possibilities. The charity event buzzed with activity in the community center's main hall. Colorful banners hung from the ceiling, and the smell of coffee and fresh-baked cookies filled the air. Sarah stood near the refreshment table, watching Mickey help set up chairs for the elderly attendees. His gentleness with them surprised her, the way he carefully guided an old woman to her seat, how he listened patiently to a grandfather's long-winded story. She smoothed down her simple blue dress, feeling almost peaceful. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. For once, she felt like she belonged somewhere outside her usual routine of work and caregiving. "You doing okay?" Mickey asked, approaching her with 2 cups of coffee. "Yes, I think I am," Sarah replied, accepting the cup with a small smile. "This is nice, seeing everyone come together like this." Her phone buzzed in her purse. Sarah almost ignored it, wanting to hold on to this moment of normalcy, but years of being a caregiver had trained her to always answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she retrieved the phone. "Hello?" Her voice was steady, but her heart started racing when she recognized the number of her mother's nurse. Mickey watched as the color drained from her face. The coffee cup slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a splash that drew concerned looks from nearby guests. "I'll be right there," Sarah said, her voice cracking. She ended the call and grabbed her purse, her movements frantic. "Mom's having trouble breathing. They're saying I need to come right away." "Let me drive you," Mickey offered, reaching for her arm. But Sarah was already backing away, shame and guilt washing over her. "I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have left her. What was I thinking?" The room seemed to spin around her as she stumbled towards the exit. Faces blurred together, concerned, pitying faces that made her feel even worse. She'd been foolish to think she could have a normal evening, to believe she deserved any time away from her responsibilities. "Sarah, wait!" Mickey called after her, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. She pushed through the double doors into the cool evening air, gasping. "I can't do this, Mickey. I can't be here having fun while my mother needs me. What kind of daughter am I?" Mickey caught up to her in the parking lot. "You're a daughter who's done nothing but care for others. That doesn't make you bad for taking one evening for yourself." "You don't understand," Sarah choked out, fumbling with her car keys. "Every time I try to do something for myself, something goes wrong. It's like a sign that I'm being selfish." "That's not true," Mickey said softly, his gruff voice gentle. He reached for her hand, but Sarah pulled away. "I have to go," she whispered, finally getting her car door open. "I'm sorry, but I can't." The guilt pressed down on her chest like a weight. She'd let everyone down. Her mother by leaving her, Mickey by running away from his kindness, herself by believing she could balance both worlds. As she slid into the driver's seat, she caught a glimpse of Mickey's concerned face in her rearview mirror, but she couldn't bear to look at him directly. "Please," he said, "at least let me help." But Sarah was already starting the engine, her vision blurring with tears. She pulled out of the parking lot, leaving Mickey standing alone in the growing darkness, her heart heavy with the familiar burden of responsibility and the fresh ache of pushing away someone who cared. Sarah sat in the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital waiting room, her hands trembling as she filled out yet another form. The clipboard felt heavy in her lap, and the questions blurred before her eyes. Her mother's sudden collapse at home had sent her into a panic she couldn't shake. The beeping of machines and hurried footsteps of hospital staff created a symphony of anxiety around her. She'd seen her mother looking pale before, but nothing like this. Clara had been so weak she could barely lift her head, her skin a frightening shade of gray. "Ms. Harper?" A nurse approached with a sympathetic smile. "Your mother is stable now, but we need to run some more tests." Sarah nodded mechanically, her throat too tight to speak. She watched as another set of doctors rushed past, their white coats fluttering behind them like wings. The antiseptic smell made her stomach turn. In the small hospital room, Clara lay still, connected to monitors that beeped steadily. Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed, taking her mother's frail hand in hers. How had things gotten so bad so quickly? She should have noticed the signs sooner, should have been more attentive. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I should have been there more. I shouldn't have gone to that event. I shouldn't have been trying to have a life when you needed me." The guilt crushed her chest like a weight. All those dance classes, art sessions, and coffee meetings with Mickey now seemed like selfish indulgences. Her mother had needed her, and she'd been off trying to find herself. Like some teenager instead of a responsible adult. A doctor entered the room, his face serious as he explained Clara's condition. Words like heart failure and immediate intervention floated around Sarah's head like angry wasps. She nodded at appropriate intervals, but inside, she was crumbling. Hours passed in a blur of medical jargon and worried glances. Sarah hadn't moved from her chair, hadn't eaten, hadn't even thought about anything beyond the steady rise and fall of her mother's chest. The sky outside the window had darkened, but she barely noticed. A gentle knock on the door made her jump. Mickey stood in the doorway, his large frame somehow looking uncertain in the sterile hospital environment. His leather jacket seemed out of place among the white walls and medical equipment. "Hey," he said softly, taking a tentative step into the room. "I heard what happened." Sarah tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked at her mother's pale face, then back at Mickey, and something inside her broke. The tears she'd been holding back all day burst forth like a dam breaking. Mickey crossed the room in 3 long strides, and before she knew what was happening, she was in his arms. His leather jacket creaked as he held her, one large hand gently stroking her back while she sobbed into his chest. "I'm failing her," Sarah choked out between sobs. "I'm failing at everything. I thought I could have both, a life for myself and still be there for her. But I can't. I just can't." Mickey's arms tightened around her as she cried, her tears soaking into his shirt. She felt small and lost, like a child who'd wandered too far from home. All her attempts at building a life for herself seemed to crumble in the face of this crisis. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "I don't know how to fix any of this." The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the small room as Sarah sat beside her mother's bed, her hand gently wrapped around Clara's frail fingers. The stark white walls and antiseptic smell had become all too familiar over the past few days. She'd barely left the hospital, only stepping out for quick bathroom breaks and to grab coffee from the vending machine down the hall. Her phone buzzed quietly. Another message from Mickey. He'd been sending her updates about her apartment, pictures of her cat, Sophie, curled up on the windowsill, confirmation that her bills were paid, and simple words of encouragement. Sarah smiled faintly at the latest message. "Sophie ate well today? Everything's taken care of here. Focus on your mom." The weight of managing everything alone had always been crushing, but Mickey had stepped in without being asked. He'd collected her mail, watered her small collection of houseplants, and even scheduled someone to fix the leaky faucet that had been dripping for months. His quiet support allowed her to be fully present with her mother during these critical moments. Sarah looked up as a nurse entered to check Clara's vitals. "Her numbers are looking better today," the nurse said softly, making notes on her chart. Sarah nodded, grateful for any positive news. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room floor, Clara's eyes fluttered open. She seemed more alert than she had been in days, her gaze clear and focused as she looked at Sarah. "Sarah?" Clara's voice was weak but steady. "I'm here, Mom." Sarah leaned closer, squeezing her mother's hand gently. "You've always been here," Clara said, her words careful and deliberate. "All these years, watching over me, taking care of everything." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Of course I have. You're my mother." Clara shook her head slightly. "No. Listen to me, sweetheart." She took a labored breath. "You've done enough. More than enough." "Mom, don't." "Let me finish," Clara insisted, her voice growing stronger for a moment. "I've watched you put your life on hold, giving up your dreams, your chances at happiness." She paused, gathering her strength. "It's time for you to live your life now. Really live it." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "But you need me." "I've had you for so long," Clara smiled weakly. "You've been the most devoted daughter anyone could ask for. But now it's your turn." She squeezed Sarah's hand. "I've seen how that man looks at you, Mickey. He has a good heart, despite what others might think." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as her mother continued. "Promise me you'll start living for yourself. promise me you won't let guilt hold you back anymore." Sarah could barely speak through her tears. "I promise, Mom." Clara's eyes softened with love and understanding. "You deserve happiness, Sarah. Don't wait any longer to find it." The words washed over Sarah like a warm embrace, releasing something tight and painful that had been locked inside her chest for years. Her mother's blessing, her explicit permission to pursue her own joy, felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't even known was there. She leaned forward and gently kissed her mother's forehead, understanding that this moment of clarity was a precious gift, one that would help her move forward, whatever the future might hold. Sarah sat in her mother's hospital room, watching the steady rise and fall of Clara's chest as she slept. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "It's okay to live your life now." Those simple words had lifted a weight she'd carried for so long. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling different. The guilt that usually crept into her thoughts wasn't as heavy. After making sure her mother was comfortable and the nurses had everything under control, she stepped outside the hospital. The spring air felt fresher somehow. She pulled out her phone and dialed Mickey's number. His gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "Yes," Sarah said, surprising herself with how steady her voice felt. "I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee with me." There was a pause, and she could almost hear his smile. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. At the small cafe across from the hospital, Sarah watched Mickey stir his black coffee. His leather jacket was worn but clean, and his weathered hands wrapped carefully around the ceramic mug. She noticed how he always seemed to make himself smaller around her, less intimidating, despite his large frame. "Mom told me something important yesterday," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "She said I should start living my life again." Mickey nodded, his eyes soft. "Smart woman, your mother." "I've been thinking about what that means," Sarah continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "For so long, I've used taking care of her as an excuse to hide from everything else, from life, from—" She hesitated. "From people who might care about me." Mickey reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant. "You've got nothing to hide from anymore, Sarah." She looked at their hands together, his rough and calloused, hers showing the wear of years of work, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like to spend more time with you, Mickey, if that's okay." His smile was small, but genuine. More than okay. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself looking forward to Mickey's visits. He'd stop by the hospital with coffee and sometimes bring her favorite sandwich from the deli down the street. They'd talk about simple things: his volunteer work at the local animal shelter, her renewed interest in painting, the weather, their hopes for spring. One particularly beautiful afternoon, Mickey showed up at the hospital wearing 2 motorcycle helmets. "Your mother's resting well. Nurses say she'll sleep for hours. Come with me?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "Let me just tell the nurses where I'll be." The motorcycle rumbled beneath them as they cruised along quiet country roads. Sarah held tight to Mickey's waist, feeling the wind whip around them. They stopped at a peaceful overlook, where wildflowers dotted the grass and the city sprawled out below them. Sitting on a wooden bench, Sarah felt safe enough to share her deepest fears. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel whole again," she admitted, "like I'm always going to be caught between what I want and what I think I should do." Mickey listened quietly, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. When she finished speaking, he turned to face her. "You know what I see when I look at you, Sarah? I see someone who's stronger than she knows. Someone who deserves every bit of happiness that comes her way." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. But for the first time in a long while, they weren't tears of sadness or guilt. They were tears of hope. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Sarah and Mickey sat on the small wooden bench outside her apartment building. The warm breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from her neighbor's garden. Sarah had changed into a comfortable flowered dress after her shift at the hotel, and Mickey wore his usual leather jacket, though he'd cleaned up a bit, his silver hair neatly combed. "You know," Mickey said, his gruff voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking a lot lately." He shifted on the bench, turning slightly to face her. His weathered hands rested on his knees, and Sarah noticed they were trembling slightly. "About what?" Sarah asked, watching as a pair of sparrows darted across the colorful sky. "About you," he replied simply. "I've met all kinds of people in my life, Sarah. Rough characters, smooth talkers, people who'd give you the shirt off their back, and others who'd take everything you've got." He paused, clearing his throat. "But I've never met anyone quite like you." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I'm nothing special, Mickey." "That's where you're wrong." His blue eyes held a certainty that made her heart skip. "Most people would have broken under the pressure you've been dealing with, but you keep going. You take care of your mother with such patience and love. You show up to work every day with a smile, even when things are tough." The sunset cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Sarah absorbed his words. "I just do what needs to be done," she said quietly. Mickey shook his head. "It's more than that. You've got this strength inside you. And kindness. Real kindness. Not the fake kind people put on for show." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "When I first saw you in that restaurant, you looked so defeated. But even then, there was something about you that caught my eye. A spark that wouldn't go out." Sarah remembered that evening. The embarrassment, the $4 in her purse, the way Frank had ignored her. But she also remembered Mickey's unexpected kindness, the first of many moments that would change her life. "I was so ashamed that night," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you didn't make me feel small. You made me feel—" She searched for the right word. "Seen." Mickey's hand found hers, rough calluses against her soft skin. "Because you deserve to be seen, Sarah. You deserve so much more than what life's handed you." The sky deepened to purple as the last rays of sunlight faded. A street lamp flickered to life nearby, casting a gentle glow over them. Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I'm scared, Mickey," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Every time I start to feel happy, to think maybe I deserve something good in my life, I get terrified. Like it's wrong somehow, like I'm being selfish." Mickey squeezed her hand gently. "Being happy isn't selfish, Sarah, and you don't have to figure it all out alone." His voice was tender, full of understanding. "We can build happiness together, one day at a time. No pressure, no rush, just two people who've found something special in each other." Sarah looked at their joined hands, her heart full of emotion. She saw the truth in his words, felt the genuine care in his touch. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this chance at happiness. Sarah stood in the empty storefront, her hands trembling slightly as she held the keys. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the small space that would soon become her cafe. The worn wooden floors creaked beneath her feet as she walked from one end to the other, trying to imagine what it could become. "You okay there?" Mickey's deep voice cut through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his imposing figure softened by the gentle look in his eyes. "Just nervous," Sarah admitted, turning to face him. "I've never done anything like this before." Mickey crossed the room, his boots echoing against the floorboards. That's what makes it exciting. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Besides, you've got good instincts. I've tasted your cooking. Sarah smiled, remembering the countless evenings she'd spent baking for Mickey and her mother. What had started as a simple way to show gratitude had grown into something more, a passion she'd forgotten she had. The contractor will be here tomorrow, Mickey said, pulling out a notepad where he'd been keeping track of their to-do list. We'll get the kitchen equipment installed next week. Sarah walked over to the front window, wiping away some dust with her sleeve. The street outside was quiet now, but she could picture it coming to life. Neighbors stopping by for morning coffee, families gathering for weekend brunches. I still can't believe we're doing this, she said softly. Mickey came to stand beside her, their reflections overlapping in the glass. Believe it, he said. You've worked hard for this, Sarah. You deserve it. They spent the next few weeks transforming the space. Mickey's practical skills proved invaluable as they painted walls, assembled furniture, and set up equipment. Sarah found herself enjoying every moment, even the challenging ones. Each step forward felt like a victory. One evening, as they were finishing up for the day, Sarah sat at one of the newly installed tables, surrounded by the fruits of their labor. The walls were now a warm cream color, decorated with local artwork. Small potted plants dotted the windowsills, and comfortable chairs invited people to stay and linger. We need to decide on a name, Mickey said, joining her at the table. He'd just finished installing the last of the light fixtures, his hand still showing traces of work. Sarah looked around the space that was quickly becoming her dream come true. How about second chances? She suggested, thinking about how this cafe represented exactly that. Not just for her, but for Mickey too. Mickey's eyes softened. Perfect, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. The morning of the opening arrived with a crisp breeze and clear skies. Sarah arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation. She'd barely slept the night before, going over every detail in her mind. Mickey was already there, setting up the outdoor seating. Morning, boss, he called out with a grin. Sarah unlocked the door, breathing in the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. The coffee machine hummed to life, and the display case waited to be filled with the pastries she'd baked fresh that morning. As she arranged everything just so, Sarah caught her reflection in the gleaming coffee machine. She hardly recognized herself, this woman with bright eyes and a confident smile. Mickey appeared behind her, and she leaned back against him, feeling the steady strength of his presence. Ready? He asked softly. Sarah nodded, her heart full. Ready. Sarah wiped down the counter of her small cafe, humming along to the soft music playing overhead. The morning rush had settled, leaving just a few regulars scattered among the cozy tables. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, making the space feel like home. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up with her usual welcoming smile. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the woman walking in. It was Linda Matthews, her old neighbor from 20 years ago, the one who had criticized her endlessly for putting her life on hold to care for her mother. Sarah Harper, is that really you? Linda's voice carried across the cafe, as sharp and precise as Sarah remembered. She hadn't changed much, still wore her pearl necklace, and carried herself with that air of superiority that had always made Sarah feel small. Linda, what a surprise. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down the cleaning cloth. What brings you to this part of town? Linda's eyes swept across the cafe, taking in every detail. I heard through the grapevine that you'd opened this place. I must say I'm surprised. I always thought you'd spend your whole life taking care of your mother. The words stung, bringing back memories of countless sidewalk conversations where Linda had told her she was wasting her life. Sarah felt her chest tighten as old insecurities bubbled up. "What can I get you?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just a cappuccino." Linda settled onto a bar stool, still studying Sarah. "You know, I always told you that you needed to live your own life. Seems you finally took my advice." Sarah's hands shook as she worked the espresso machine. Memories flooded back. The judgment in Linda's eyes whenever she'd canceled plans to stay home with her mother. The whispered conversations she'd overheard about how she was throwing her life away. The cafe's back door opened, and Mickey walked in carrying a box of supplies. He immediately sensed the tension, his eyes moving between Sarah and Linda. "Everything okay here?" he asked, setting down the box and moving to stand near Sarah. Linda's eyebrows shot up at the sight of Mickey in his leather jacket, covered in tattoos. "Well, this is certainly unexpected," she said, her tone dripping with judgment. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. All the progress she'd made, all the joy she'd found in her new life. Suddenly it felt tainted by Linda's presence, as if she needed to justify her happiness. Mickey stepped closer, his hand finding Sarah's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, just for her ears. "You've got nothing to prove to anyone." Sarah took a deep breath, drawing strength from his presence. She placed Linda's cappuccino on the counter and straightened her shoulders. "You know, Linda, you were right about one thing. I did need to live my own life. But you were wrong about when that should happen. I don't regret a single moment I spent with my mother. And now I'm living my life exactly how I want to, with people who support me without judgment." Linda's mouth opened in surprise, but before she could respond, Sarah continued. "Your cappuccino is on the house. Consider it a thank you for showing me exactly the kind of person I never want to be." Mickey squeezed her shoulder gently, pride evident in his eyes. Sarah felt something shift inside her, as if an old weight had finally lifted. She watched Linda gather her things and leave, and for the first time, the judgment in those eyes didn't touch her at all. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden tables. Sarah wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate strokes, lost in thought. The early hours before opening had become her favorite time of day, a quiet moment to reflect on how much her life had changed. Mickey sat at the counter, his large frame hunched over a steaming cup of coffee. His weathered hands wrapped around the mug as he watched Sarah with gentle eyes. The sight of her moving through the cafe with such purpose made his heart swell. "Remember that first night?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "When you were on that awful blind date?" Sarah paused her cleaning and smiled. "How could I forget? There I was, with $4 to my name, feeling smaller by the minute." She shook her head, amazed at how far she'd come from that moment. "And then this gruff biker drops a few $100s on my table like it's nothing." Mickey's laugh was deep and warm. "Couldn't help myself. Something about you just—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "You had this light in you, even when that guy was treating you like dirt." Sarah put down her cleaning cloth and leaned against the counter, facing Mickey. "I was terrified of you at first, you know. This big, intimidating man with tattoos and a leather jacket." "Most people still are," Mickey said with a slight smirk, but his eyes held a hint of old pain. "They don't know you like I do," Sarah replied softly. She reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. The contrast between their hands, his rough and calloused, hers soft from years of working with cleaning solutions, told the story of their different paths to this moment. Mickey turned his hand over to hold hers properly. "You saw past all this," he gestured to himself with his free hand. "Past the reputation, past the mistakes. You saw me. And you saw me, Sarah answered. Not just as someone's caretaker or the quiet maid. You saw all the dreams I'd packed away. The morning light caught the silver in Sarah's hair, making it shine. Mickey studied her face, the laugh lines around her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile. She'd grown more beautiful to him with each passing day, as she'd slowly emerged from her shell and reclaimed her joy in life. We make quite the pair, don't we? Mickey said, his voice gruff with emotion. The rough biker and the kind-hearted maid. Sarah squeezed his hand. Who would have thought? Mickey stood up slowly, his presence filling the quiet cafe. He walked around the counter to stand beside Sarah, still holding her hand. His free hand reached into his jacket pocket, and Sarah's breath caught as she saw what he was holding. A simple gold ring, nothing fancy, but beautiful in its simplicity. Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not good with fancy words or grand gestures. He looked down at their joined hands, then back up to her eyes. But I know that every day with you makes me want to be better. Makes me want to keep growing, keep loving, keep building this life we've started. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as Mickey held out the ring. The morning sun caught it, making it glow warm and bright, just like the future they'd been slowly building together. Will you continue this journey with me? Mickey asked, his voice full of hope and love. The early morning light streamed through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow across the freshly polished tables. Sarah wiped down the counter with practiced ease, her movements comfortable and sure. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of newly baked pastries cooling on the rack behind her. Mickey sat at the counter, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug. His leather jacket hung on the coat rack by the door, a symbol of how much had changed. The tough exterior remained, but there was a softness in his eyes now, especially when he looked at Sarah. Remember that first night? Mickey asked, his voice gruff but gentle. When you were counting pennies at that restaurant? Sarah paused her wiping, a small smile playing on her lips. How could I forget? I was so embarrassed, and then this scary-looking biker drops hundreds on my table. Mickey chuckled, the sound warm and rich. Scary-looking, huh? Well, you have to admit, you weren't exactly approachable. Sarah moved around the counter to sit beside him. But you saw me when I felt invisible. The morning sun caught the silver in Sarah's hair, and Mickey reached out to tuck a strand behind her ear. His touch was tender, despite his calloused fingers. You were never invisible, Sarah. Just hidden under all that worry and responsibility. Sarah leaned into his touch, thinking about how far they'd come. The cafe around them was proof of their journey together. The walls were decorated with some of her paintings, artwork she'd finally allowed herself to create again. Photos of them with their regular customers hung near the register, and a special corner was dedicated to her mother's memory. I never thought I'd have this, Sarah admitted, gesturing to the space around them. The cafe, the freedom to paint again, someone who understands me. Her voice grew softer. I spent so many years thinking I had to choose between taking care of others and being happy myself. Mickey's arm found its way around her shoulders, pulling her close. That's the thing about love, darling. It doesn't make you choose. It just makes everything bigger. Your heart, your dreams, your ability to care. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Outside, early morning joggers passed by, some waving through the window. Their cafe had become a neighborhood fixture, known not just for good coffee, but for the warmth that seemed to radiate from within. You know what I love most about this place? Mickey asked, his eyes scanning their shared domain. The free coffee? Sarah teased. Besides that, he smirked. I love that we built it together. Every decision, every paint color, every recipe. We did it as a team. Sarah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. She thought about all the small moments that had led them here. Mickey fixing her car, their long talks over coffee, his steady presence during her mother's illness, the way he'd encouraged her to pursue her dreams without making her feel guilty about her responsibilities. We make a good team, she said softly, squeezing his hand. Mickey turned to face her fully, his expression serious but tender. The best, he agreed. And I was thinking, maybe we should make it official. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as Mickey reached into his pocket. The morning light caught something small and bright in his hand. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.
I don't think it matters. His driver's license is suspended.
Well, none of us are coming out to play that, so you gotta make your own way back there. What do you mean you're not coming up? You guys are raising on me in this
Okay.
fucking position.